An armed American agent, a Chinese security line, and a gate that would not open. Not in a conflict zone, not at a military checkpoint, at one of the most symbolically charged locations on the planet, the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, during a state visit between the two most powerful leaders on Earth, and for over 30 minutes, no one moved. Today is May 14th, 2026. President Donald Trump is in Beijing for a two-day summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. On the agenda, trade negotiations, Iran, Taiwan, energy security, fentanyl. The stakes could not be higher. But behind the formal handshakes and state dinner toasts, something else was happening, something the cameras almost didn't catch. According to media members on the ground, Chinese security officials blocked a U.S. Secret Service agent, armed, credentialed, on duty, from entering the Temple of Heaven venue. The resulting confrontation was described by a Telegraph correspondent on the scene as, quote, an intense standoff. Entry to the event was delayed by over 30 minutes, while officials from both sides argued in heated discussions at the gate. And that wasn't the only incident. Reporters covering the trip say Chinese officials also repeatedly attempted to prevent American press and White House staff from leaving their positions to join the presidential motorcade, multiple times throughout the visit. The White House did not immediately respond to questions. The Secret Service was contacted, but had not commented at the time of this report. If you want fast, factual coverage of a story that is developing by the hour, subscribe now, because there is considerably more to this than a security disagreement at a gate. Let's establish exactly what we know and what we don't. Thursday morning, Beijing. President Trump and President Xi were scheduled to visit the Temple of Heaven, an imperial complex dating back 6 centuries, deeply significant in Chinese history, and chosen for this meeting with obvious symbolic intention. The grounds are vast, ancient, carefully controlled. According to reporters present at the scene, a U.S. Secret Service agent carrying a weapon, standard procedure for any agent traveling with the president, was stopped at the perimeter by Chinese security personnel. Chinese officials reportedly refused to allow the armed agent through. What followed was described on the ground as an intense standoff. The delay stretched to over 30 minutes, possibly longer. Reports vary slightly on the precise duration, but multiple journalists at the scene confirmed the confrontation was real, it was heated, and it held up the event. Now, a key distinction. This is being reported based on accounts from journalists on the ground and posts on social media. The White House had not confirmed or denied the specifics by the time of this report. The Secret Service had been contacted but had not responded. So while the incident appears well attested by multiple independent witnesses, the full official account from either government is still absent. That gap matters, because in diplomacy, the official version and the ground-level reality often look nothing alike. What we do know, the standoff reportedly ended. Entry eventually occurred. The Trump-Xi events proceeded. The White House later confirmed that the two leaders met and discussed Iran, energy security, fentanyl controls, and market access. But multiple reporters noted this was not a single isolated friction point. A Telegraph correspondent posted on X that there had been, quote, several intense confrontations since being here. They also noted that Chinese officials repeatedly tried to stop American press and White House staff from leaving their positions to follow the motorcade, behavior that, if accurate, goes well beyond a single gate dispute. Here is what makes this more than a procedural squabble. The Secret Service operates on a doctrine that has zero exceptions. The President of the United States is never, under any circumstance, left without armed protection. That is not a preference. It is not a negotiating position. It is the foundational requirement of every presidential movement, foreign or domestic. When a host country's security apparatus physically blocks compliance with that doctrine, even briefly, it creates a collision between two parallel systems of authority, both of which consider themselves sovereign on the same ground. And there is a precedent for exactly this kind of collision, one that, depending on who is telling the story, ended very differently. Because this has happened before, almost exactly 9 years ago, at the same Great Hall of the People. And that confrontation reportedly involved something far more sensitive than a sidearm. In November 2017, during Trump's first presidential visit to China, a U.S. military aide carrying the nuclear football was reportedly blocked from entering the Great Hall of the People by Chinese security officials. The nuclear football, that briefcase, technically called the Presidential Emergency Satchel, contains the authentication codes and communications equipment required for the president to authorize a nuclear strike. It travels with the president at all times, always, without exception. The aide who carries it maintains physical proximity to the president continuously. According to reporting by Axios from that period, then White House Chief of Staff John Kelly was notified and personally walked to the entrance to escort the aide through. A Chinese security official then reportedly grabbed Kelly. A U.S. Secret Service agent then grabbed that Chinese official. What happened next became a dispute in itself. Reports at the time described a tackle. The Secret Service pushed back. They issued a statement on X, at the time still called Twitter, reading, quote, "Reports about Secret Service agents tackling a host nation official during the president's trip to China in November 2017 are false." A source told Fox News at the time there had been some shoving, that the situation de-escalated, that the nuclear football was never touched. Notice the precise wording. The nuclear football was never touched. Not that nothing happened, not that there was no physical contact. That specific object was not interfered with. What is significant about today's incident is the pattern it confirms. 9 years apart, two different summits, the same fundamental friction, American security protocols meeting Chinese sovereign authority at the exact same door. The question that no official from either government has publicly answered is this: who yields and why, and how is that decision made in real time? Because the answer to that question is not just procedural. It tells you something about the actual balance of power in the room. Not on paper, not in communiques, right there at the gate. Do you think this type of security friction is an unavoidable reality of superpower diplomacy, or is something more deliberate happening? Let me know in the comments. Beyond the security dimension, the broader context of this Beijing visit is itself significant. Trump and Xi are navigating an extraordinary range of pressure points simultaneously. Ongoing tariff disputes, Taiwan military tensions, the Strait of Hormuz crisis involving Iran, China's relationships with nations under American sanctions, and a new bilateral agreement reportedly being discussed covering economic and AI oversight. The two leaders toasted each other at a state dinner. Xi spoke of peace and prosperity, and somewhere outside a ceremonial gate, two security details stood at a standoff for 30 minutes. The contradiction between those two images, the formal warmth of the summit and the raw friction at ground level, is not incidental. It may be the most honest snapshot of the U.S.-China relationship available right now. Here is what almost nobody is focusing on. It was not just the Secret Service being blocked. Reporters on the ground, American journalists traveling with the presidential press pool, were also repeatedly prevented from moving freely. Chinese officials tried to stop U.S. press and White House staff from leaving their designated positions to follow the motorcade. Not once, multiple times throughout the visit. Think about what that means. This was not a miscommunication at one checkpoint. It was a pattern, applied to the press, applied to staff, applied to security. A systematic effort to control the physical movement of everyone in the American delegation across multiple locations throughout the trip. Who authorized that, and at what level? Let's step away from the geopolitical frame for a moment and think about the people inside this story. There is a Secret Service agent, name unknown, rank unknown, standing at a gate in Beijing. They have a job, one job, to be armed, positioned, and ready at all times. They have trained for this. They have protocols for this. The protocols are not ambiguous. And on the other side of that gate are Chinese security officials who have their own protocols, their own chain of command, their own definition of what authority looks like on their soil. Both groups are professionals. Both believe they are following correct procedure. And yet they are standing, facing each other at an impasse for over 30 minutes. No one in that courtyard, no agent, no official, can make a unilateral decision without potentially triggering a diplomatic incident. Call the wrong move, and you're not just an agent who made an error. You are an international incident. You are the lead story on every network in both countries. That is a weight that most people who have never worked protective detail will never fully understand. The journalists covering this trip were experiencing their own version of the same pressure. A Telegraph correspondent posting updates from the scene described several intense confrontations. Other reporters captured video of the press pool being physically blocked, redirected, cut off from following the motorcade. These are men and women whose entire professional function is to document what the president does on behalf of the American public. Being systematically prevented from doing that job, not by logistics but by deliberate human obstruction, is not a minor inconvenience. It is a direct challenge to the principle of press access to power. And yet they kept reporting. They posted on X. They captured what they could. Their dispatches from the ground are the primary reason this story exists at all. The White House staff caught in these incidents face their own calculus. Every staffer who travels on a presidential trip understands that they operate under two frameworks simultaneously: American authority, which they serve, and host nation rules, which they must navigate. When those two frameworks collide physically, there is no manual that covers every variation. You adapt, you escalate if necessary, and you hope the people above you are receiving the right information in real time. Meanwhile, inside the meeting rooms, away from the gates and the courtyard friction, Trump and Xi were seated across a table discussing some of the most consequential issues on the planet: Iran, Taiwan, nuclear risk, trade imbalances affecting hundreds of millions of people, energy supplies, the flow of fentanyl chemicals through global supply chains. The men at the top of both governments were talking, and their security teams were standing at a standoff outside. There is something deeply human about that image. The formal architecture of diplomacy, the summits, the toasts, the bilateral agreements, requires an enormous infrastructure of people operating at lower levels of visibility: agents, aides, journalists, drivers, protocol officers, communication specialists, all of them navigating a foreign environment with very different rules, under enormous pressure, in real time. When the system breaks down at that operational level, even briefly, it doesn't just create a logistical delay. It creates a moment of raw, unscripted friction between two countries that are, by any honest measure, in deep structural competition with each other. And in diplomacy, unscripted moments carry their own weight. Neither government has given a full public accounting of what happened at that gate. The White House declined to comment immediately. The Secret Service had not responded by time of publication. The Chinese government has said nothing publicly about any of this. That silence on all sides is its own answer to something. What we should watch: whether either government eventually addresses this directly, whether the incident affects the tone of remaining summit activities, and whether we see any adjustment in how the rest of the trip's security arrangements are managed. If the Chinese side has been sending a message about control, about authority, about whose rules apply on this soil, the response from the American side in the next 24 hours will tell us how Washington has interpreted it. Take a step back. The Trump-Xi-Beijing summit of May 2026 is unfolding against a backdrop that makes every friction point carry extra weight. The United States and China are simultaneously negotiating trade terms, managing military proximity in the Taiwan Strait, and pressing each other on Iran's regional behavior. According to reporting from this visit, Trump told Xi directly that the U.S. wants China to play an active role in de-escalating tensions at the Strait of Hormuz. Xi reportedly expressed interest in purchasing American oil amid the ongoing energy pressures from that crisis. Trump publicly stated that Xi said China would not supply Iran with military equipment. These are significant statements. If accurate, they reflect a degree of coordination between Washington and Beijing that neither government's public posture would suggest is possible. But that is precisely the puzzle at the center of the U.S.-China relationship in 2026. The two countries are deeply adversarial at the structural level, competing for technological supremacy, military influence, and economic dominance, while simultaneously dependent on each other in ways that make outright rupture catastrophic for both. The security standoff at the Temple of Heaven is not the cause of that tension, it is a symptom. When a host country's security apparatus applies systematic pressure to an American presidential delegation, blocking agents, redirecting press, controlling staff movement, it is asserting a form of dominance that operates entirely below the level of formal diplomacy. It doesn't appear in the joint statement. It doesn't get discussed in the bilateral meeting. But everyone involved knows it happened, and the pattern matters. The 2017 nuclear football incident was never fully resolved in the public record. The competing accounts, the Secret Service denial, the source-level confirmation of shoving, the precise phrasing about what was and wasn't touched, left the actual ground truth unclear. That ambiguity was managed, absorbed, and the relationship moved on. What is different now is scale. In 2017, the U.S.-China relationship had tensions, but the economic interdependence was more intact and the military competition less advanced. In 2026, both governments have spent years actively decoupling in strategic sectors, accelerating military buildups, and drawing sharper lines around Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the technology supply chain. The summit's agenda items are genuinely significant. A bilateral board on economic and AI oversight, if it materializes, would be unprecedented in scope. Progress on fentanyl controls, if verifiable, would affect American communities directly. Movement on Iran could reshape the security architecture of the Middle East. All of that is real. And yet, a security detail was blocked at a gate for over half an hour while their president was inside. Journalists were physically prevented from doing their jobs. An armed agent stood at an impasse on foreign soil. The intelligence agencies of both countries will review every detail of how this trip unfolded, not just the formal meetings, but the friction points, the moments where systems collided, the decisions made under pressure in real time by people far below the summit table, because those moments often tell you more about where the relationship actually is than any communique. The bigger question is not whether this incident gets resolved diplomatically. It probably already has been, quietly. The question is what it represents, and whether the next time, at the next summit, the next state visit, the next gate in the next ancient courtyard, the standoff lasts 30 minutes or longer. This story is still developing. We do not yet have the full official account from either government. We do not know what was actually said during those 30-plus minutes. We do not know whether the incident affects the remaining summit activities or the broader diplomatic outcome of this trip. What we do know is that when the two most powerful governments on Earth meet face to face, what happens at the table and what happens at the gate are two very different things. And sometimes it's the gate that tells you what's real. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think incidents like this are routine friction in high-stakes diplomacy? Or is there a deliberate message being sent? And subscribe because as the official accounts emerge over the coming hours and days, this story is going to look more complete and possibly more complicated than it does right now.